The ambassador to Ukraine just presented his credentials to Pope Francis as a secret meeting focused on targeting so-called opposition to Pope Francis is organized by progressives. Joining me now with analysis of these stories and more is the editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal. He joins us from EWTN studios in Rome. Bob, I want to begin with what Pope Francis had to say during his Wednesday audience this past week regarding this war in Ukraine. He says, after World War II, the attempt was made to lay the foundations of a new era of peace, but unfortunately, we never learn, right? The old story of competition between the greater powers went on, and in the current war of Ukraine, we're witnessing the impotence of the organizations of the United Nations. Bob, your comments and thoughts on the Pope's observations here, and the Ukrainian ambassador to the Holy See presented his credentials to the Pope this week. Your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I think this reflects a bit of naivete on the part of the Holy Father in the sense that the UN, as we know in the United States, has never really been capable of dealing with crises like this. It's the great powers, it's the Security Council with the 5 permanent members and the rotating members that have to deal with crises like this, particularly warfare. And for me, it's actually unrealistic to expect war simply to go away or international mechanisms to stop international conflicts, because we live in a fallen world, and it only takes some ambitious man like Vladimir Putin to decide he wants or he thinks he has a right to move in on another country to upset the UN system. And what is the UN going to do about it? It has to rely on the United States, England, France, Germany, et cetera, to carry out the business. So to me, it's unrealistic. It's a kind of a progressive illusion that the UN is going to be able to help us in these kinds of situations.
Now, the Pope has been very clear in his opposition to this war. I think he's done everything diplomatically and otherwise. I mean, he even engaged Patriarch Kirill a few weeks ago, which I thought was such an important gesture on his part to put a stake in the ground and say, no, religion can't be used to justify the slaughter of innocents anywhere in the world. And during his trip to Malta this past weekend, the Pope had this to say about Putin's aggression in Ukraine. He said, once again, some potentates, sadly caught up in anachronistic claims of nationalist interest, is provoking and fomenting conflicts, whereas ordinary people sense the need to build a future that will either be shared or not at all. Now, Bob, he has yet to call out Putin by name, but this is part of the Vatican diplomatic stance always, because they want to be the peacemakers and perhaps facilitate some negotiation.
Yeah, I think that's fine. The new Ukrainian ambassador, who's Orthodox, by the way, has said that the Pope has done essentially everything he could possibly do. And I think we have to commend him for that. He's played a conspicuous role in trying to resolve this situation. The trouble, like with the UN comments that we just talked about, is to think that warfare has somehow become anachronistic. It's a sad thing to say this, but I don't believe warfare is ever going to disappear. I think it's probably a biblical perspective to say that it will not disappear until the Lord's second coming. So, sure, we can do certain things. A potentate, though, can decide to do some things that seem to go back. John Kerry made a similar remark that this is sort of a 19th century way to resolve problems. Well, warfare and human greed and human ambition don't observe centuries. They are pretty much constant across time.
Yeah, the Pope also, he alluded to a possible trip to Kiev. He's been invited by the mayor of Kiev to visit the country. I don't quite know how that would be possible, certainly not during an ongoing war, but and there's been no timeline. But your thoughts on even musing about the possibility of such a visit?
Yeah, I think it would be great if it can be worked out, if all the the details, he's safe and he's able to make statements there. I think this would be a tremendous thing. Now, what we have to recognize, though, is as in the consecration of Russia and Ukraine to Our Lady of Fatima, although Fatima was not mentioned very prominently in that consecration, there is this kind of Russian let's say, bias against the Latin Church, against the Western Church. And in a strange way, the Russians themselves, Putin and his henchmen, may think of this as sort of the spiritual equivalent of a NATO presence in a country bordering theirs that they think should not be there. So I think from our perspective, I think it's a good thing for the Holy Father to show that support, to go there physically and to show his support for those people in person. Whether it will have any effect in Russia, that would remain to be seen. And I fear that his good intention might produce some bad reaction.
Bob, this trip to Malta was originally scheduled for May of 2020, and it was to focus on the issue of migration. Now, the issue took more significance due to the exodus of over 4 million Ukrainian refugees in recent weeks. Pope Francis focused his remarks on the Mediterranean migration route and what he sees as Europe's flawed migration policies. He called for the Mediterranean to be a, quote, theater of solidarity, not the harbinger of a tragic shipwreck of civilization, end quote. The Pope has criticized often European nations for their migration policies. How were those remarks received, especially in light of what we're seeing happening in Ukraine and outside of it these days?
Well, as you know, the first visit that he made as Pope was to Lampedusa, which is an island very, very close to the African coast. And he was, in the very beginnings of his papacy, he was advocating for more lenient immigration practices for people coming from Africa. For an American or for other people, I think the way to think about this is like our border crisis, where you could have huge numbers of people coming illegally into the European countries. And that's why the individual countries themselves have been resisting. He's actually said it's a crime that they're resisting, and that these camps in Libya are like lager. They're like the concentration camps that the Nazis ran. And of course, the situation is terrible there. But the difference, I think, with that situation, which has to be managed, and the situation in Ukraine is that you really do have people in immediate danger of losing their lives. And a lot of those Ukrainians who are going into Poland and the Czech Republic and Slovakia, et cetera, plan to return once peace returns. It's not going to be like this is a permanent invasion of a large number of people. So, look, he has a point. I think he overstates it a little bit, but it's like our Mexican border. You have to be able to control your borders, otherwise your country just descends into utter chaos.
Yeah. Bob, late last month, a group of 70 cardinals, bishops, and theologians gathered privately for 2 days here in the United States at Loyola University in Chicago. It was an event that they titled Pope Francis, Vatican II, and the Way Forward. Now, the conversations reportedly focused on how the U.S. opposition to Pope Francis is connected to opposition to Vatican II. Now, it was organized in part by a progressive columnist at the National Catholic Reporter, a dissenting publication. We would normally ignore this kind of thing, but the guest list, I think, demands attention. Honduran Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez Maradiaga was there, a confidant of the Pope. Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago, Sean O'Malley, even the papal nuncio to the U.S. was in attendance. Now, Maradiaga has been embroiled in charges of embezzlement. He described the conference this way. We have this, what they call opposition to the Pope. It's trying to build walls, going backwards, looking at the old liturgy, or maybe things before Vatican II. Vatican II is unknown by many of the young generation, so it's necessary to come back and to see that all the reforms of Pope Francis are rooted in Vatican II, end quote. What do you make of this comment and the focus here?
Well, I think it manifests a certain touchiness, if I can put it that way, on the part of some of the Pope's main supporters. Look, you and I don't oppose Vatican II, although we probably were named by name in this conference as people who oppose what Francis is trying to do. That's not at all true. There's an ongoing debate in the church about the meaning of Vatican II. Obviously, for intelligent people like John Paul II and Benedict, who are actually at Vatican II, there was one interpretation that tried to be more faithful to the actual documents. What we hear from people like this is something that really reminds me of more of the attitude of the 1970s, where everything seemed to be open and, we were going to be open to the world and let in fresh air. That's not what people who were actually there felt at the time. So, look, there's a debate about Vatican II, but to portray different views of what the Holy Father is doing as somehow a denial of a universal council of the Church, I just think that that's the wrong framing of what's happening.
Yeah. Well, according to reports, as you mentioned, EWTN and my name were taken in vain. The sad scribblers at the National Catholic Reporter have been for years, Bob, and they've written articles and books about this. Nobody reads them, but they've issued them. They've tried to establish some connections between moneyed Catholics and this network and this show in particular. Now, look, it's a cute conspiracy theory, but I'm telling you, for the record, it's completely fabricated. Unlike these periodicals, we merely report and we ask legitimate questions. I think we do it credibly and we present facts and quotes. I have also, and I say this also for the record, I have never cleared topics or editorial for the world over with anyone, including donors. But these people, they are professional liars, Bob, and now apparently they're coddled by these esteemed institutions and even esteemed individuals who I suppose think this helps them politically in Rome. I don't know what the thinking is, but opposition is when you blindly hate a person and you allow that to color your perceptions, your language, your point of view. When you describe people as opposition or the enemy, like this Sanhedrin meeting in Chicago. Now, we're engaged in credible analysis of church events, and we do it for our audience. I think, and I've always thought for 25 years, people are smart enough to see what's going on, whether I'm here or not. And that is incidentally, that idea and that philosophy of reportage, that is why we have what they do not. It's called an audience. Bob, your final thoughts. And are there so many Catholics who are objecting and rejecting Vatican II that they're now resisting Pope Francis's agenda?
Well, I've been the head of a think tank for over 20 years, a more or less conservative Catholic think tank. And whenever somebody wants to come to work for us, I tell them, look, the other guys have $1,000, maybe $10,000 for every one that we have. And if you look who attended that conference in Chicago, it's people from Boston College, from Villanova University, from Fordham University. I mean, that group has got many of the Catholic colleges and universities behind them, chanceries, all sorts of resources. Yes, of course, we do have some more conservative donors who try to support us, but it's not as if this is some massive secret. Every organization has got financial backers of some sort or another. Now, to me, there's a sensitivity there, and they're surprised because we relatively have few resources compared to what they have, and yet we have an influence. And I think you're right, and an audience, and that really kind of is a burr under the saddle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, but I have to laugh at this grand conspiracy theory. Look, one wishes that traditional organizations were as well financed and organized as these people imagine they are. Good luck. On Monday, Bob, Pope Francis named Cardinal Peter Turkson as the new chancellor of both the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. Now, Turkson is the former prefect of the Dicastery of Promoting Integral Human Development at the Vatican. He resigned from his post back in December, a few months after Pope Francis ordered an inspection of the dicastery. Now, Turkson succeeds Archbishop Marcello Sanchez Sorando, who famously said the Chinese government best recognizes the social doctrine of the Church and that President Biden should not be denied communion for his support of abortion. Bob, what has the reaction to Cardinal Turkson's appointment been in Rome? What are you hearing?
My concern about his appointment, because as we've been saying about the new constitution of the Curia, personnel is policy. You can have structures, but depending on who's appointed to various offices, it can lead to one thing or its opposite. I connect this, and I'm a little bit worried that we know that Cardinal Hollerich from Luxembourg has said that both science and social science have indicated that there's no foundation for the Church's teaching, for example, on homosexuality. Now, Turkson is now heading two pontifical academies on the sciences and the social sciences. Is he now going to examine those two claims by the Cardinal Hollerich, that those two disciplines either have exploded the Church's teaching on sexuality or don't explode the Church's teaching on sexuality? I don't know. He's not that forceful a personality. He's a nice man. He's obviously not unintelligent, although I don't think he's really the kind of person who can deal with complex social policies. And so maybe he's put there to kind of keep things quiet. Maybe he's going to fall into line with where the Vatican is headed. I don't think anybody knows at this point.
Bob, we will leave it there. For commentary from Robert Royal, visit thecatholicthing.org. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, my pleasure, Raymond.